A lot of cool stuff to show, so let's get started right away. Thanks for coming. My name is Martin. I work for VMware. I work as part of the core Spring engineering team. So the team that is doing all the Spring framework stuff, Spring Boot, giving you all the Spring Boot greatness. And my special subject is the tooling, so all the IDE extensions that the team ships for Eclipse, for VS Code, for Thea, for other IDEs, not for IntelliJ, in case someone is wondering, because the IntelliJ folks are doing great Spring tooling out of the box anyway. So there's nothing left for us to do, which is awesome. So we can focus on bringing you great Spring tooling into all the other IDEs. So why am I here to talk today about automating code changes? The reason for that is that we basically face a situation at the moment, and I think in the foreseeable future, when new versions of Spring come along all the time, right? So I'm not who's using Spring or Spring Boot and stuff like that? Yeah, a few hands. Who's using Jakarta, stuff? Okay, so new versions coming out every day, so you need to upgrade your applications to new versions all the time, basically. And sometimes it's super easy. You just update the Spring Boot version and that's it, right? And sometimes it's more involving, right? You need to change to adapt to new APIs. The Spring Boot team changed property key names, stuff like that. All those things, right? Dependencies change. And you have basically a lot of work to do. So our thought was, what can we do to help you, to make your life easier to jump to new versions? And while we were looking at that, we stumbled upon a framework that is called OpenRewrite. So we looked into that, and we figured out that, oh my God, we can use this for a lot more than just helping you to jump to new Spring Boot versions or things like that. And what can we do to make this, using Spring or OpenRewrite easier? And what can we do to maybe integrate that into the IDE? Where does it make sense? Where does it not make sense? And this is basically kind of the summary of where we are with integrating something like OpenRewrite into the IDE. But what is OpenRewrite, and what's the idea behind OpenRewrite? It's an open source project, got invented at Netflix, more or less, some time ago. And they had the challenge not about upgrading to new versions, but kind of keeping their source code up to date in an automated way. So they wanted to ensure that whenever people check something in, whenever the CI build runs, there's always a certain level of quality, a certain level of style, a certain level of formatting applied to all the source code across all the enterprise. And they have thousands of applications, even thousands of Spring Boot applications, but that's kind of a different story, not super important here. But they have thousands of applications. So they want to kind of raise the quality level. They want to kind of adopt, for example, new language constructs across the code base, and not just by individual developers thinking about, oh my God, now I should maybe use a code block over here. And they change the source code to code block. They wanted to kind of apply something like that maybe across the project, across the whole enterprise. So they invented something like this OpenRewrite framework, and now it's kind of open source. It's developed by a company called Modern. And this whole framework, this whole library is basically all about defining those code changes in an easy way, sometimes even in a descriptive YAML way, and applying those code changes to projects automatically. Under the hood, inside of the CI build, inside of the Maven build, manually if you want that. And the idea is to have those code changes be described and implemented as easily as possible. If you want to do something like that now, you basically dive into some compiler APIs, maybe you dive into the Eclipse JDT API and implement code manipulation things specifically for JDT, but some folks use another IDE, so what should we do about that? So the idea was really to make it as easy as possible, and then use those descriptions and describe changes to your project in this descriptive way. For example, there's a CVE, you should not call this method of this library anymore. You should call another method of this library instead, in a different way. Define this and apply this change to all your projects, or to one project across the whole source code base in an automated way without anyone touching that. That was the idea. And that goes kind of beyond just kind of CVEs. You can update to new libraries, you can do API migrations, you can apply new constructs of Java language versions. So for example, if you, I already mentioned the text blocks, right? You want to jump to Java 17, you want to use text blocks across your source code. You could use something like this open source project, say, okay, please change all my code snippets, all my source code to use text blocks instead of the other stuffs. So that looked like exactly what we were looking for. Like, oh, maybe there's a way to kind of automate these Spring Boot version migrations, helping people to adopt new stuff. The cool thing about OpenRewrite is that you can not only kind of describe your changes in a relatively easy way, you can also implement code changes that are more complicated yourself. Right? So you can you can modify ASTs if you want to go down that path that deep. And you can also look at other file types. So there are so-called, we would talk about that, recipes or so code changes readily defined for property files, for YAML files, for Kotlin source code, for Python, for GitHub action descriptions, things like that. Right? So it's not limited to just modifying Java source code, which I think is pretty cool, because you can really think about doing a lot of those automated changes in one description that then changes a POM file, changes Java source code, or changes your property file for you. The idea is you have so-called basically recipes behind the scenes. That's kind of the major thing that you interact with. And they are implemented in basically OpenRewrite parses your whole world. Your project creates ASTs and runs visitors on those ASTs to modify the AST. And because this is so, let's say, cumbersome to do for you, there are kind of pre-built visitors included. Pre-built visitors that do certain things, like change a method name for you. And in order to use that, you can just say, I create a little snippet of YAML, say, please apply change method name to my entire source code with this method name, converting this to this new method name, for example, which I think is really cool. But under the hood, it's really modifying the AST and writing back the AST to disk if you change or if you apply and run those recipes. It has a lot of kind of sophisticated logic behind the scenes that it does not destroy your formatting or whatever, but we will not go into the details. Another interesting thing about OpenRewrite is that you have these very, very small building blocks like change method name. That someone implemented an AST visitor that is able to walk through the AST and change method names. And you can use that by putting a little script of YAML into your project and say, please do rename A to B. The cool thing is you can also kind of use a composite pattern to aggregate those things. So you can say, okay, I define my own recipe, and the first thing is change method A to B. Oh, also kind of change property key X to Y. Oh, and also do this and also do that. So you can aggregate those things. And then you can aggregate those aggregates. So you can really build sophisticated things and a lot of changes in one big bulk if you want building those out of small building blocks, and we will see how they look like. When you build those out, you can describe them in YAML. Not everyone's favorite language, I know, but that's what they chose. And if you want to do more sophisticated stuff where there's no pre-built AST visitor for, you can write one on your own if you really want to go down that path. The cool thing is there are so many of these pre-built small little recipes out there that it's super easy to just grab them and reuse them and apply them to your project. And we will take a look into that. And there's a whole community building around those recipes because they are all open source, so people can contribute recipes. For example, there's a whole GitHub project about rewrite Spring. So people contributing recipes about what is necessary to jump from Spring Boot version 1 to 2, from Spring Boot version 2.5 to 2.6. Oh, something that we missed, someone else contributes this little change. So it's really impressive. There is a nice overview, nice documentation about that, how you write your recipes and how you implement them and how you use them. And I would like to kind of, before we dive into a little demo, quickly show you something like that to give you an idea about what we are talking about. We're talking about a recipe catalog here that is kind of categorized into all those different changes about changing property files, YAML files, JSON, Groovy, modifying POM files, modifying Java stuff. Oh, let me get back to from XML. No one uses XML anymore. For example, here, you can apply some basic building blocks for changing Java code, like remove an annotation, remove a static import, rename a package, reorder method arguments, very small building blocks. And if we take a look at that, change method name here, for example, you will see it's fairly easy. It's a YAML where you say, okay, change method name. Let me make that go a little bit bigger. That's okay. Change the method name. This is my old method pattern. This is my new name. Do this change for me. You don't need to write your AST visitor yourself. You don't need to modify ASTs. And you can use this recipe for this simple change method name change, for example. And there are many, many more. You can see this long list for Java stuff. You can dive into kind of, for example, the Spring things and see stuff around Spring Batch, changes that you can do for upgrading specific things in Spring Batch that has changed between versions, or apply certain best practices that you would like, or ways you would like people to use this Spring Boot version, for example, or your library, and things like that. We can also dive into Maven, and you will see you can do stuff like add a dependency, remove a dependency, change the version of a dependency. You can define all that, basically. And if you look at those things and how you can do that, there is, for example, here the Spring Rewrite thing, and in this case, I selected the Spring Boot 3 migration script, which is more or less kind of taking this migration guide that you would read through step by step, transfer all what is written down in the migration guide, and try to change your project to do all these changes that are described by the Spring team. And instead, it's basically codified in this YAML file using all these recipes, all these building blocks, like please upgrade to Java 17 and do everything that is included in this recipe, which also includes 1,000 other things, right? Change certain dependencies, add certain dependencies. If you scroll down, change all these kind of property keys that have changed from one version to another, and things like that. So you as a library owner, for example, you could give people this thing and say, okay, if you want to migrate to Jakarta IE, here's a recipe that changes all your source code from Java X to Jakarta IE, for example. If we go quickly back to, still on time, there are certain or different ways how you can use those recipes and apply them. I said you can put all of this into your Maven build. So you can add a Maven plugin, and in this plugin you can say, please always, whenever you execute a Maven build, always execute these recipes. And you can list them out, right? You can do that. I think it's pretty useful for stuff like these coding patterns, styles, remove unused imports, things like that. So whenever there's a Maven build and there's an unused import, it will get removed in the Maven build, which is, I think, could be quite nice. There's also a way to just execute them on demand, basically with a kind of Maven command saying, okay, execute this recipe. It basically tells you execute the rewrite Maven plugin and use this recipe that is put into the parameter here. In this case, remove unused imports. And if you want to modify that and create your own recipe, you could also do that and execute that from the command line. For example, the recipe that I mentioned about changing a method name, you need to define the old name and the new name. And this way, you create this little YAML file and say, give it a name, basically my method rename or my library method rename or whatever, and then say, execute that on the command line. And we should take a look at that, how that all works in action. So, bear with me, it's not Eclipse. Don't worry, I will show up Eclipse as well. In this case, you see a simple little Spring Boot project, no worry about Spring. unused import, oh my god, unused import. So let me just execute, basically remove unused import thing. It executes the Maven build, it executes in this case just the remove unused imports recipe, and after that, once that is done, it's parsing the whole project or whatever, it removed the unused import, right? What you would expect. Nothing really super exciting, but you see, it works. In my little application, I'm using a library, the movie service. That's actually a library that I got from someone else. And it has changed. So if I would like to jump to a new version, and someone gave me this little rewrite recipe. And the rewrite recipe tells me, oh, the method get movies got changed to get all movies. And my rentals limit property got changed to rentals movies limit. So my property is over here, my source code is over here, and in this case, I can also say, please execute my little adapt to new version of library recipe, basically this thing that I have defined here. I gave it a name, or basically an ID, more or less, and some display, some kind of nice documentation, and it executed this stuff, and after that, all those things are changed to the new method name. My properties are changed. It executed exactly those changes on the project that I described in this recipe, and I assembled this recipe out of 2 others. And those can consist out of thousands of others, which I think is pretty nice. So we thought about, yeah, you will see Eclipse. We thought about this. This is cool. Can we make this more accessible directly from the IDE? Can we do something as the next step? So why not allow people to list the available recipes, the recipes that are around in the IDE, and just say, basically click and say, okay, please execute this recipe. And that is basically what we did. So inside of our language server, we have the Spring Tools is kind of built out of a language server architecture stuff. So we decided we don't want to build stuff specifically for VS Code or Eclipse or whatever. We put most of the features into the language server. So we put this into the language server. It looks around for recipes and gives you the option to execute those recipes and apply them to your source code, basically. As kind of a very kind of simple bottom line to an integration into an IDE. And therefore, we get this IDE integration for VS Code as well as for Eclipse. And since we have that for Eclipse, I will, of course, show also Eclipse here. Just a quick heads up. It's kind of, all this is a little bit early days. So if something doesn't work, don't worry. If something looks a little bit kind of, let's say, not implemented by a real designer or someone who knows how to build UIs, but maybe some hackers have an idea how to put up some widgets, but that's it. Bear with me, don't worry, right? That might be the case here and there. So let's jump to Eclipse, or the flavor of Eclipse in this case. I have more or less the same project over here, which you might see, get movies. I have this rewrite recipe in my project. And what you can do basically now is kind of execute in a refactor operation, and it lists you recipes that are around. It's a little bit small, sorry for that. Here, it shows you the recipe that I implemented in my own workspace. And it tells you this consists out of change method name and change a property key. What are exactly the changes that are embodied in this recipe? And you can say, yeah, please execute that. And it just runs basically this recipe. Sometimes executing those recipes take a while. That is because the whole architecture of OpenRewrite is, of course, not implemented for an interactive way of doing those things. It's meant to be executed as part of a build, executed as part of a CI thing, executed as parse the whole project and run all the recipes that I have on this project. It's not really built for use this tiny little thing and do it just super quickly, right? So that's a challenge, an interesting challenge. So it applied the changes, right, as you would expect. as well as changes to, I think, my properties file in case yeah. So it also did with the properties file. The base did the same inside of my workspace for the project so that I can take a look at what has changed and do further things. And what I think is especially interesting is that, yeah, save that. That I can take a look what is included in one of those recipes. For example, if I take a look at some Spring Boot recipes or some other ones, Spring Boot 2 best practices, I can see what is included. It's remove request mapping annotations and replace that, for example, with get mapping annotation or post mapping annotation, right? That's also kind of a best practice for Spring Boot, for example. Things like that. So you can do a lot of different things, and you can imagine all kinds of code changes that you could possibly automate, putting them into those recipes and letting people apply them very easily, which I think is quite cool. So we did the basic stuff. So I said at the beginning we were looking at kind of helping people to automate, maybe not fully automate, but help them to migrate to new Spring Boot versions. So that's why we benefited from this OpenRewrite project, because there are already people implementing those recipes for Spring Boot, actually. So they are not all coming from the Spring team. It's basically the community doing all these recipes and implementing all these or many of those recipes. Of course, also many implemented by the modern company behind OpenRewrite, but also from our team, from other folks. And we were able to say, okay, we try to integrate that in the IDE and make that very accessible, which I think is also quite cool, because you can do quite fancy stuff with that. And let me jump to a more, let's say, not my movie rental service with one class. That's probably a little bit boring for migrating. Of course, I use Pet Clinic, the most famous real-world application from the Springy side. And what we did as kind of a first step is we implemented a validation that tells you if there is a new Spring Boot version around, because that's kind of the entry point, right? So first we tell you, hey, there's a new version. You should upgrade. You should upgrade to the new patch version or new major version, whatever. And if you see there's a new major version, for example, in this case, there is a way to say, go, upgrade. Execute the full OpenRewrite recipe description for this migration. And if I do that, you will see, that's what he was talking about. It takes a while to do a few code changes, not that many, but that is because OpenRewrite really tries to do everything, resolve the whole world, create all the ASTs around, and then execute the recipes. And we can take a look at the changes, and you will see that those recipes, they change kind of the parent version of Spring Boot. They switched over the Java version to 17. They updated a dependency. They added a Maven dependency for certain Jakarta XML things, for example, that are not included in Spring Boot. They updated the coordinates of a specific Maven SQL connector, because that has changed. The new Spring Boot version uses a new version of that. That is not just a new version, but it's also different coordinates for this MySQL connector nowadays, for whatever reason. So it did those changes. Of course, it also did apply these kind of changing the imports for those packages that switched over to Jakarta. And since you might remember that the migration to Spring Boot 3 also includes the migration to Java 17, and the migration recipes for migrating to Java 17 includes a whole bunch of stuff what you should do to your source code to be Java 17 ready, or be a nice guy in Java 17 or whatever. It also does things like switching over your string to a text block, for example, because the recipe thinks, yeah, that might be a good choice. You should use text blocks now for strings that are longer than whatever, right? It also applies kind of certain other best practices. I think there was kind of a test case that I saw somewhere where it applies a certain pattern, how you should use JUnit, for example. Oh, you should not use assertions, assert throws, you should use this and add a static import or whatever, as kind of a best coding practice that was defined. So this recipe got included, and you can execute that over here. which I think is pretty nice. And you can basically define those recipes yourself. So for your own library, for your own project, for your internal stuff, for your external things, which I think is pretty awesome. So we did all that, and then we were so excited about changing the source codes automatically and using these little snippets that we thought, I don't always want to run all those things on my whole project all the time. Sometimes I really would like to look at the source code and tell the user, hey, the thing that you're doing over here is maybe not the best practice for using Spring Boot 3. You should maybe not have an auto-wired annotation on a constructor. You don't need that anymore. Or you should not have an auto-wired field. You should use a constructor injection instead. We would like to tell the user that and not just blindly update everything on demand. So we thought about, let's do something like actually validations. So these little squiggly lines that we all familiar with using the Java compiler and the JDT tooling. And let's have a quick fix for that. So let's have a quick fix that applies this little change to just the source code that I'm looking at, basically doing something like this, right? So squiggly line, a validation for auto-wired, not the best practice anymore. And apply a change. So in this case, super easy, remove the auto-wired annotation. That's a no-brainer. But for the example you have an auto-wired field, create a constructor, remove the auto-wired from the field, make the field final, and so on. So it's a little bit more involved, and you can think about other changes, more complicated ones. So we thought about, oh my God, this would be so awesome it feels like it's the same, right? So we're basically doing kind of the same changes over here. We want to do the same quick fixes that OpenRewrite also executes when we do this whole migrate to Spring Boot 3 or apply this recipe. Wouldn't it be awesome to reuse that in the tooling and basically make those recipes available as little quick fixes over here, so that we don't have to implement all those quick fixes manually ourselves anymore. We don't have to implement them based on modifying source code, modifying ASTs, parsing ASTs ourselves, and doing all these things. Let's use OpenRewrite for all of that. And that's what we did. And not entirely, but it was really interesting because we tried to do both, right? We tried to do the validation, the squiggly lines, because that all belongs together, right? So let's use OpenRewrite to tell us, oh, here's the change that I would do, and then use OpenRewrite to make the change on demand. And these squiggly lines, we did that, and if you use the specific version of the Spring Boot tools, you might have experienced that as well. Horrible performance and horrible memory consumption because of this assumption of OpenRewrite saying, oh, we parse everything, we resolve everything, and then we keep all that in memory, and then we run the recipe. So if you want to do the squiggly line for 5 files, it was kind of, oh yeah, let's parse all the things, and let's resolve all the types of all the class path stuff, everything that we have, because OpenRewrite has this idea about we need to know the whole world before we can make a change. So that was let's say, a quite stupid idea in the end. The good news is we removed that again. So the latest version of the Spring tools, of course, does not contain validations based on OpenRewrite. So the validations are now again looking at an AST produced by the awesome JDT parser, which is just super fast. So we do that. But the quick fix is OpenRewrite. So we can do, I think, quite funny stuff, at least from my point of view, funny stuff. So if I do something like, let's get back to all that. Here's an auto-wired field, something that I said. So this squiggly line produced by the Spring Boot language server, parsing stuff using JDT core and looking at the AST, but control the quick fix, convert auto-wired field to constructor parameter. That's actually executing an OpenRewrite recipe. And then, as you have seen, it's not super slow. So it's still a quick fix, or at least almost quick fix. Oh yeah, it did not do the other thing. Let's see. Oh, maybe it's a bug. Ah. Yeah, there's always if you update stuff right before the thing, right? Oh, now it worked. Awesome. Yeah. Try it again. Reboot if something goes wrong. Yeah, no. Another thing, for example, you don't need a public modifier on a boot method, on a bean method, not on a boot, on a bean method. Quick fix, remove that. And for this case, we said, okay, for those cases, we offer 3 quick fixes, saying, oh, please just do it over here, just do it across the whole file, or just do it across the whole project. So I could actually choose that, but let's do it over here. It actually didn't remove. Oh, what is going on here? Oh, it did it! Yeah, my God. As you can see, the language server thrown an error. Always a pleasure to see that during a presentation, as you might know. Let's quickly go back to the slides. So, with that awesome demo experience, yeah, always awesome. Next, always awesome. Some references if you would like to know more, and if you would like to try things out, of course, and try to experience the kind of the bugs yourself, if you want to. Feel free to take a look at the latest release, or maybe use the latest nightly snapshot that my colleague will fix tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe. With those links, I keep them over here for a little moment, because the next one is just kind of the thank you slide. So we keep that over here, and I think we still have a few minutes left for answering questions, if there are questions. You mean this question mark over? Yes. We started to implement all this into the Spring tools because there's the thing that we were working on. So we didn't invest the time kind of starting right with a super independent OpenRewrite integration as a totally independent thing. But that's a question, right? If people are interested in that, if you think this would be awesome to use beyond the Spring tools in regular Eclipse, VS Code, whatever, let us know, or file a request or whatever, a GitHub issue, and say, hey, it would be awesome to use this OpenRewrite integration independent of the Springy stuff. There are a few kind of questions and challenges coming up around that, but that's something we could discuss, man, and basically extract it out of the Spring language. So we didn't do that because it would have kind of created additional overhead, additional work, and we wanted to try it out first and see if that really works. Is it really the right thing? Does it make sense to do it? Looking at these kind of helping people to migrate Spring Boot versions. But yeah, totally. At the moment, the answer is no. In the future, if it's get upvoted on GitHub, and everybody says, yeah, we want that, why not? We are totally open for that. So we don't want to keep it closed in the Spring tools by no means. It's just a question of when and how to invest the energy to do that. Or if people want to kind of chime in and work with us together on that, also welcome, anytime. Hope that answers the question. I think here was a question there, and then in the back.
JDT has a similar rewriting via the cleanup.
Yes.
What makes sense to integrate it there? But the cleanup is not only static in the JDT, but can be configured in this file.
Yeah. Yeah, why not? Interesting idea to say you improve or enhance the cleanup action inside of Eclipse to also being able to execute OpenRewrite recipes, and please execute these or whatever. Yeah, definitely a possibility. Makes sense to me. Maybe there was a question in the back before, and then you, yeah? Yeah, what we did is, and and you might have quickly seen it in this dialog where I expanded the recipes, is that you can actually walk through that and select or unselect which recipes you really would like to execute. So for example, if you hate the text block stuff, but you would like to execute everything else when migrating the Spring Boot stuff, for example, you could kind of basically walk down the tree and say, ignore the text block thing, but execute everything else, and then it executes everything else. But that is something that we build basically inside of the tooling on top of OpenRewrite. OpenRewrite itself doesn't do that. So what we do basically behind the scenes is when you do something like unselect, we basically create an on-demand recipe that looks like all the stuff that is selected and execute that instead of the predefined one. It's basically a copy removing those things that you deselected. But that way in the tooling at the moment it's possible to do that. If you want to exclude certain things or just include certain things. Possible, yeah. If that answers the question, I'm not. Yeah, almost. Yeah.
What is optional and what is mandatory for complete migration? That would be nice.
Yeah, interesting question. I don't think we have anything like that at the moment. Yeah.
Another question is there the catalog that you showed. Is that available in the IDE?
No. No, the catalog is not available in the IDE. So what we did in the beginning, and I can show you that afterwards. There's a preference where you can say these recipes should show up in my IDE as a selection. Right? If you kind of wipe that out and say show me everything, you will see a long list of 1,000 things, small things that maybe sometimes don't make sense or has weird descriptions. It's totally overwhelming and totally not useful at all. That's why we added a preference to the tooling, say, please show only these 5, these 10 recipes from this package, whatever, to kind of make it usable and give the user a good overview. But you can change that preference if you want to. Yes. And basically it is showing, in this case, everything that is included in the libraries that we package up with the language server, all the OpenRewrite libraries, or everything from the OpenRewrite GitHub repo, basically, plus the stuff that you can add yourself to that. So, for example, the recipe that I have in my workspace, I basically added myself, saying, oh yeah, and in addition to that, please also look at these jar files over here, or these YAML files over here, to grab all the recipes from these additional sources if they are newer, coming from somewhere else, and we did not include in the tooling as we released the tooling, basically. So there's kind of both things. But there's also something like we added to the tooling to find those recipes all across the place.
If they were picked up live, namely.
Yes.
Okay, but it seems like you curated them and then you have.
The curation is put into preferences that you can just see and change in the tooling. Kind of that's the curation. So we basically package up everything that we get from the GitHub stuff, but then we curate the list that we show on the UI. And you can change that. Jonah. Which parsing? The OpenRewrite project uses Java-C as a parser, and they enhance that quite a bit to kind of they have kind of not the pure AST, but I forgot how they name it. It's kind of a semantic syntax abstract, I don't know the exact name, where they add additional information about formatting and white spaces and stuff like that, because they want to change the AST and then write the change back, but it should still not destroy your whole formatting and insert weird spaces or white space when you use tabs and whatever. So they keep all this information, they put all this information into their version of the AST in addition to what Java-C produces. As far as I know, they tried, but I'm not sure, they tried to reuse kind of their, I would not call it generic AST, but it's a very Java-y generic AST, where they try to parse the other languages into that as well, into this abstract notation that they have. But it's super, it looks like in Java AST, really. And of course, it does not work for these kind of property files or YAML files or something like that. That's just writing the file modification visitor using the same framework, but then grabbing stuff from YAML files or property files or all the other XML files or whatever. As far as I know. Yeah.
Did you try to talk to the OpenRewrite guys and see if they could optimize to work on these small files? And not on the whole code base, but on small set of files?
Yes, we did.
And second question, I understand the recipes are not written by Spring, but the community. But did you test how effective this is in migrating project from Spring Boot to 3, for example?
Yes. Yes and yes. So first question, yes, we are in close contact with the folks behind the OpenRewrite project and the folks from Modern about the implementation stuff and so on. We also talked a lot about this performance thing, and it is on their radar, but it's not a priority for them because their use case, they have a SaaS version of that and things like that. So their use case is to do this kind of across companies, across many projects as kind of bulk changes. So they are not really worried about doing a little change in one little file that's kind of totally out of scope. You could do something like that, but it would involve quite some deep changes in the way OpenRewrite works, basically introducing kind of these lazy resolution, and which makes certain use cases a little bit weird in the OpenRewrite case because they do the kind of change method name, but then you need to know where are all my method invocations. And for that, you need to kind of resolve all method invocations to find out whether they point to the type that you're trying to rename. So it's a bit a difficult case for them. It's not a priority. So I don't expect anything to happen over there. And the second question is, we also contribute parts of that. We also talk with them about the Spring Boot recipes. We contribute from the Spring team ourselves. We try things out. It's not something that we officially sign off and say, this is now the perfect thing to migrate, because there are always things missing. This is not kind of the one click and then it's all done. There are always parts missing that you need to do manually. So it's a constantly evolving thing. That's why we did not kind of say, oh, this is the blessed version, or so. That doesn't exist at the moment.
Maybe 80% is okay, 70%.
I think most of the stuff that's in the Spring Boot migrations is awesome. It's great. Yeah. So sorry, everybody's leaving now. So which is totally fine. Enjoy the rest of the conference and thanks for coming.